Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, our very own Bob Greaves will be talking about how religion and theology can prevent the building of knowledge. Is it possible? Well, maybe by the end of this show, he will convince you and throw a couple of alternatives your way. In just a moment on The Unconventional Pastor.
Well, good evening. It's another Wednesday. My name is Bob Greaves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. Great to be back with you again. In fact, great to be back into town. I've been out of town for the last 3 days, visiting with one of my sisters who recently had hip surgery. So I got a chance to actually visit with her and get some work done around her house that she lives there alone, and so there's a few things that probably were hard for her to do. So I was able to take care of a few of those things. It was fun, enjoyed it. Good to be back though. I miss people here at home too. Anyhow, tonight I am going to be talking about knowledge building principles, and this is really going to be springboarded off of an article that I had read recently that I thought was just awesome. The article was written by a professor of education who does a great deal of research into education, and she wrote an article. Let's see if I can remember the title of it. Had something to do with, let's see, I think I wrote it down here in my notes. The title of her article was Collective Cognitive Responsibility for the Advancement of Knowledge. Anyway, it was an awesome article. Her name is Marlene Scardamalia, and she hails from Canada. But in reading the article, it was an article that was both an insight and critique of education, knowledge building, both as it might apply to the individual and to a field of study itself. And it was in reading the article, it made me painfully aware, and I mean painfully aware. Thank you. More water. Painfully aware of the fact that theology is such an anti-knowledge building field based on some of the protocol and habits that have developed around it. And so it really, seeing that contrast made me feel that this would be something worthy of talking about on tonight's show. And in this, she actually talks about, in this article, she talks about 12 different principles that are a part of true knowledge building. And it made me realize that each one of them, that there was ways in which it could apply to the habits and the history of theology and how it has resisted real knowledge building. For example, she talks about the idea that in real knowledge building, we deal with real ideas that are oftentimes addressing authentic problems. Sometimes the authentic problems are personal. Sometimes they're scientific. Scientists. For example, they seek to develop theories to help explain things we're trying to understand. They don't develop theories just to try to understand things we could care less about or that don't make any difference. There's usually some purpose lying behind what we hope to do with the advancement of various different scientific insights and knowledge. And so consequently, knowledge building involves, building real ideas upon authentic problems. As we seek to understand the world around us, and we try to find ways of, through that understanding, we want to appropriate that knowledge in a way that we can actually put to work and do something with it. that is practical, necessary, and really relevant to our lives. When it comes to theology, unfortunately, however, I think that we see a serious departure in the stories that have come to us about things that Jesus did. Jesus seemed to really resist the impracticality of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and of various other aspects of the Jewish tradition, in favor for where people really are at, what they're really feeling, how they're really suffering, what they really need, and as a result, seem to have an approach to the people that was more practical in terms of where they were at, what they suffered, what they needed, what they understood, or how they questioned themselves and God. And so Jesus seemed to have much more of a realistic and authentic approach in a lot of this. But religion sought to then establish this religion around Jesus, where a great deal of what religion did and what theology did in the process of its 2,000-year history with Christianity is it actually creates a lot of the problems it tries to be the solution to. Which in a sense is trying to address problems people wouldn't even think of having if it weren't for the fact that Christianity is trying to teach them that they have this problem. And so there's something about that kind of an attitude and approach that is inauthentic right from the get-go, and is a principle that kind of is contrary to knowledge. It forces people to begin to consider problems they actually don't have, looking for solutions they need, which end up really being a distraction towards more superstitious ideas in actuality. And it turns religion into a practice that has a purpose rotating more around the control that those who have the authority of the religion are able to maintain and use as a way of manipulating the people who are the adherents then of that kind of faith. Now, of course, as you may realize, I am certainly a person of faith. I do believe in God. I consider myself a person who admires and looks up to who Jesus was, who he is. And so, but I do take a look at the history of Christianity and its traditions and feel that it has radically gone astray, and in ways that whether or not it was deliberately intentioned at first or not, probably had more to do with the control they were able to maintain, ends up either deliberately or inadvertently opposing a real atmosphere of true knowledge building. There were some of the other things that struck me as being interesting about Marlene's concepts of knowledge building, and that is that real knowledge develops in an environment where there are improvable ideas, is what she called it, and this means that we realize that our knowledge is in part. And that over time, if we focus on what our knowledge is and what our knowledge is not, and think things through and struggle with them, that over time we can improve upon our knowledge. And this is very important as a dynamic of moving knowledge forward and of building knowledge. If people feel that what can be known is static, that we already know what can be known, there's nothing new that can be known. When religion and theology in particular try to become that which believes it has all the answers, we can tell you everything about God, and there's not going to be anything about God that you need to know or could ever know that hasn't already been revealed to you through our concepts and through our theology and through our authoritative documents and all that. When knowledge is presented in this stagnated, fixed conclusions already made. There's something about trying to embrace that sort of a thing where I'm trying to figure out what is already known by the experts, and that once I know that, I know everything that can be known, and there's just no moving forward with this. If the ideas can't be explored and improved upon, not only individually, but from generation to generation, The lack of an approach to an idea is actually counterproductive to the natural psychology of the human being, so that it's very, very difficult to really acquire knowledge in any kind of an environment where we feel that that the ideas can't be improved upon, that there's no place to go with this. And so this can be a real difficulty in terms of both the sociality of knowledge and the technology of knowledge. There need to be ideas that can be improved upon. Another thing that she mentions is necessary for the building up of knowledge is the openness to accepting diversity. Diversity in opinion, diversity in observation, diversity wherever it may exist as honest and authentic diversity. We find, however, that the church early on begins to deal with people who are saying things that are different from what has already been said. And the church very quickly, by even the year 500, is deeply steeped into standardizing what its teachings are and declaring people who vary from those standards as heretics. Now, this isn't to say that there's no such thing as an incorrect idea. This isn't to say that there aren't people whose concepts are manipulative and headed in some sort of a disingenuous direction, and nor is it to say that we shouldn't be able to criticize certain ideas as being motivated from such things. If that appears to be the case, or if we question that that's the case, we can certainly raise the question. But the idea being here that wherever there is knowledge, particularly since it's knowledge that is going to be in an environment where we can move forward, this means that there is going to be from time to time perspectives introduced that, oh, we hadn't thought of that before, and we need to consider that. And so there needs to be a certain level of respect and an openness to certain levels of diversity within the opinions of what's going on. Consensus can sometimes be a formation of anthropological bias of a culture and does not necessarily represent genuine knowledge or satisfaction of a fact. In fact, I was reading in Noam Chomsky's On Language, the book over these last few days. Took the book with me down to visit when I was visiting my sister, and was reading it in the early morning and late evening time. Of course, one of the things he said, some of the things that he was talking about when he would discuss concepts of language and what he would call surface structure. Some people accused him of trying to go back to structuralism, which is an idea that used to be quite strong within the linguistic community, but has since fallen out of favor. And of course, his response to it was, well, so what? What if this constantly happens in any field of endeavor, that sometimes an idea loses favor, but then some other information might come to light that causes us to have to reconsider some things that may have fallen out of favor that might in some other way possess relevance, so that even if there was the problem of reintroducing structuralism in a sense, that's not a problem. If there's a valid reason to sometimes take a look again at something we've already dismissed, then that's what we do if we're going to be honest with our knowledge. However, he did feel that the concepts of the surface structure was actually taking a look at structuralism in a very different way than the way it had been applied, so that it was in many ways really a different view, but recognizing that structuralism was at one time very popular for reasons that were coherent, and the reasons that made it coherent still require some sort of an explanation that might be similar to the ideas that ended up being rejected. But anyhow, this was an example, I think, and I don't want to lose you by chatting about linguistics, but this was an example of how the diversity contributes to the building of knowledge and how things move forward. Because there's room for diversity and room for reconsideration and room for people within a field of study to to disagree with each other, and room for a person to even reconsider among themselves, within themselves, ideas that, in light of some new ideas, to kind of rework their previous conclusions and their previous rejections. This is just something that honest scholars do as they move forward. And so diversity is absolutely essential to allow such a dynamic as that to occur. And the church has traditionally not handled diversity well. Wherever diversity becomes too strong, churches split and you get new denominations. This denomination believes this, that denomination kind of understands it this way, and the two just don't talk to each other. Or if they do, they talk by arguing and championing their ideas. But in a real search for knowledge, if knowledge is going to advance, there's a respect for ideas I don't share or that I don't buy into. But if I can recognize that there are intelligent people who do buy into it, I can at least hold on to it and recognize it. One of the scholars I've had an opportunity to know, and I hope he doesn't mind me referring to him as a scholar. I hope he wouldn't. A good friend of mine that I've known now for over 30 years, Dr. Michael McKimmey. When I first met him, one of the things that astounded me was sometimes you could ask him a question, and in answering the question, he would not give you his opinion. But he would give you a list of opinions to answer the question that were held by various different scholars and kind of leave you there for you to assess which scholar you think may have been more onto it. And he gives you 5 or 6 different answers to a question that you might ask. And he had this ability to understand the different opinions and to present them in a way where he's presenting them in their best case scenario so that he offers excellent arguments for each of these different points of view, and you don't have any clue where he was at. And this was a technique he preferred to do and use because he wanted people to not only think for themselves, he wanted them to build their thinking upon at least the way previous scholars have struggled with the issues. And to me, it was an amazing thing that he had this ability and to do it and to do it well and to maintain a wide variety of insights into a variety of different points of view on a particular given issue. It was amazing. And so he was a person who not only engaged in diversity, didn't seek to resolve it, at least to you. And as I got to know him over the years, he certainly did have his own opinions, but he really didn't consider his own opinions to be as important as the process of the students he dealt with in terms of their learning process. And so diversity of opinion and diversity of point of view, the strengths and weaknesses of them, was seen as a very important part of the process of a person truly becoming a true scholar in their own right. And so, he would work with that, and I found it very, very impressive. It also forced him to be a person who was very knowledgeable about a lot of opinions, because he determined that he would not share his own. And so if he was going to share anything, he's going to have some sense of what other scholars have been saying, and to be aware of what those diversities were and what their significances might be and how they affect the person who's struggling with some of these issues for the first time, or for the 5th time, or the 25th time, or the 105th time. You know what I mean? Anyhow, continuing on here, some of Marlene's concepts here that she had in terms of the ability to really build knowledge and moving things forward. Something she would call epistemic agency, which really had more to do with the fact that multiple participants are involved in the process of moving a field forward. The knowledge comes from a variety of people negotiating among themselves what the weaknesses and strengths are, and that each person involved in that process is an agent of moving that process forward, and that our knowledge builds when we recognize that individuals are agents of that moving forward and agents of that knowledge. and that therefore it's important that if the human race, as it were, is to move forward with insight and understanding, that we each have to recognize that it is the discussions among us and the agency that we each have as we allow multiple participants to negotiate and discuss these issues and to settle upon what they can settle because of the way that it has been tossed back and forth, and that consensus has truly been reached, not just voted on or something. And so that's a very important part of the atmosphere necessary for developing a true knowledge moving forward. There's also a sense in where knowledge can't move forward unless there's a sense of what we might call even community knowledge, which isn't always accurate. But there's a sense in which for knowledge to move forward, it doesn't help if, for example, if the scholars are moving forward, but the general population is still way in the dark. There's a need to share this knowledge with the community, to take knowledge that is really moving and advancing any field, and to a degree that's possible, related to the general understanding that people with perhaps a reasonable liberal arts education would be able to deal with, and to find ways of bringing it into the lives of many people. That when a field of study becomes so highly specialized, it's very hard in that environment for knowledge to be truly moving forward in a way that possesses the same kind of veracity and integrity. And so there's a certain kind of community collective responsibility involved in moving knowledge forward. And when it comes to theology, this is something that, of course, I think that the church has resisted. We've had the theologians and the experts, and the church interprets for us, as it were. And although the Protestant church tends to move away from that, although they move away from that in terms of the way they talk, when it still comes down to it, it is the denominational structures, the fundamentals of the faith, and the particular scholars who are respected that become the standard bearers of what is considered to be appropriate for people to be independently thinking. And if you realize what I just said there, you realize how radically contrary that is to a real concept of community knowledge that has very little tolerance for people being at the point that they're at in terms of grasping and understanding a particular concept, particularly concepts of God or concepts of interpreting the particular biblical text. There's also another principle here of democratizing knowledge. And this can recognize that within any community, there are a variety of people who each have different skills and abilities and knowledge and gifts and what have you. And that we can't always expect that everything that we're going to learn is going to come from the experts. That there are a variety of people who can sometimes bring up some very brilliant ideas, even if they're not necessarily in a field. Sometimes somebody who's a sociologist can say something that will radically introduce useful concepts into anthropology. And sometimes maybe a biologist might say something that creates a tremendous insight into the computer science area in terms of how to get the computer to interpret motion or to interpret language and to be able to deal with human behavior in a data manner that pushes the computer science field forward in terms of its artificial intelligence and the graphical user interfaces that human beings have to use in order to make computers seem a little bit more user-friendly. And so there's a sense in which we don't want to restrict knowledge as something which can only come from the experts, but that by keeping a certain openness of dialogue among the various people, learned and unlearned, people who can think, people who can find problem. Many times you'll find people who don't even have expertise in a particular area can hear an idea and say, I don't know, that just doesn't feel right to me. And they have something instinctive going on. And that there are many times it is because there's something that they perhaps can't even articulate that represents a problem that in listening to what they have to say, they can sometimes, maybe they won't offer the solution or they won't even have the answer, but they can present the problem that then the experts will have to struggle with. And so there's a sense in which democratizing knowledge is also important. for moving knowledge forward. There's also a need for symmetric knowledge advancement. And this is more along the ideas that that not only do we need to move knowledge forward when it moves forward, but it's important that knowledge move forward not in just one particular area of the population. The elite, the rich, the wealthy, the Americans, but that knowledge needs to not only move forward across the general population, but that also knowledge needs to move forward in all areas. It's not good enough if we say, well, let's make scientific advances in mathematics and in computer science, but let's forget about medicine. And no, there's a sense in which we need to maintain a balance where every area of knowledge that we deal with is also involved in its own process of moving forward and of moving forward, so that we have an environment where we realize that in any way that we know anything, there's a possibility that is an area where knowledge can be advanced. The church has tended to behave as if, we're done. We have the conclusions. You guys can go on, but we're done. We already know everything we need to know theologically and about God and about the text of the Bible. But not only that, but since they know everything, that sometimes when other areas are moving forward and they say things that contradict what we think we already know, we're now involved in stupidity in our opposition to the knowledge that is actually moving forward. And this is something that you'll never convince the church that it's doing this or that tradition is doing this in its theology, but it is actually setting itself up to where its loyalty to its traditions instead of a loyalty to moving forward with knowledge actually causes it to be set up to be in opposition to knowledge moving forward. And it is amazing to me just how ignorant this can cause some people to be about various areas of knowledge, where the rest of the population, not so committed to that tradition, is able to move forward with greater ease. Sometimes it's not even rocket science; it's just simple stuff. But theology can stand in the way and really do that. Pervasive knowledge building was also something. Similar to the symmetric, that we want not only to develop what we think is a balance of knowledge. We want to make sure that this is something that can just extend into every area where we might even have knowledge. That we realize that knowledge can advance anywhere and in anything and on any topic, and that this is an attitude which, when embraced, allows things to move forward. And of course, this pervasive knowledge building is something which is oftentimes resisted within certain spiritual traditions, particularly when they perceive the world is lost in sin and led astray by the deceptions of Satan and all that other stuff. They end up really dragging their feet. And in fact, in the book by Dr. White, what was it? It's something about a history of the warfare between theology and science in Christendom. I can't recall the title. It's been a long time since I read it. But he talks in there about how many of the just faulty arguments that theology has had over the last 2,000 years with science, where eventually science wins out and even the theologians start agreeing with the science that they fought, that many times this takes up to 150 years before the traditions can acknowledge the truth of the science. An example of that would have been Copernicus. It took 150 years for both Protestants and Catholics to admit that Copernicus was onto something that was correct. And meanwhile, the people trying to be loyal to the faith and loyal to the Bible and loyal to the traditions and the theology and the conclusions they had drawn based upon their liturgy and based upon their understanding of the Bible was really in opposition to what Copernicus was doing. Meanwhile, the people who were honest about science, honest about math, honest about astronomy, were right there with Copernicus as soon as they had done the work. And all it took was some honest math and some calculations, and you could verify this for yourself. And yet it took the church 150 years, both Protestant and Catholic, to finally agree with something where they could have done the math at any time. I mean, Copernicus did the math. That's how he came up with it. And it's not as if there had to be more advances in math for this to happen. But this failure of pervasive knowledge building is what was a big part of what stood in the way, and why the church is oftentimes dragging its feet in almost every area of knowledge when it begins to question things that have been previously a part of theological traditions. Another thing that's important about building up knowledge is the constructive use of authoritative sources. Now, this is a balance, because you see, it's important in knowledge building that you recognize and respect authoritative sources. But at the same time, you have to recognize that authoritative sources are only a snapshot at a moment in time, and represents the consensus or the conclusions of a particular field only at a particular moment in time, as coherent as it can be with what has been understood, considered, and dealt with up until that moment. And therefore, a constructive use of authoritative sources also involves a high willingness to question the authority when that's appropriate, and to not question it when you don't have really appropriate cause to do so. So an appropriate constructive use of authority involves a recognition of the accomplishment of what we've been able to think through so far, without just dismissing it out of hand simply because you like to, but rather a willingness to respect what has been authoritatively understood by scholars, while at the same time maintaining a healthy skepticism toward improving upon it or countering it, but only by having something that can be also equally authoritative in questioning. Now, this is something which is not easy to do, but at the same time, within theology, within Christendom, there's no real interest in doing this. In fact, if anything seems to, in any manner, contradict their authoritative interpretation of the text, they are deeply committed to simply rejecting it outright. There's no consideration. They begin to mock the authoritative information. They begin to actually deal with it in ways that they don't even realize, demonstrate they don't have a clue what they're even talking about. Sometimes when you listen to some of these young earth creationists talk, and then they begin talking to you about fossil records, they're usually talking to people who don't know anything about geology, or they're talking to people who don't know anything about biology, and they're saying things that if you do know something about geology or know something about biology, you realize these people don't even know what they're talking about, and they're mocking and making fun of things that represent authoritative sources of information and knowledge. And so they have a deep disrespect for the knowledge that we have gained, and a disrespect for the process that is open to questioning that authoritative information, but only on a basis that is valid, verifiable, and legitimate. And so this is a real difficult part that theology has oftentimes struggled with in just an incredible manner. Another concept that Marlena talked about was the knowledge building discourse. That is that knowledge isn't good enough to just kind of come up and now we have it. We really need to have an environment where we kind of talk about it. We just talk about it. We discuss it, sometimes not even knowing why we're discussing it, sometimes talking about it just because it's fascinating, talking about it because we're not really sure, talking about it because we have a community that is willing to kind of talk about things, chit-chat about things, and in terms of the things that we know or don't know or think we know. It is certainly willing to move things forward, and that's because in all of the things that we talk about, we are willing to talk about what it is we know, what it is we don't know, and whether or not what it is we think we know is really known or not, and how it is we know it, and how it applies, and if it's useful in a particular manner or not. That there's a certain openness to the discussion ongoing, and sometimes even just at the ambient, noisy level of even just chit chat that's not necessarily headed anywhere or possessing any particular agenda. This is some part of the process of moving knowledge forward. There are a number of other things that were spoken about here. Let's see if I can include some of these other ideas in a way that relates. Another principle that she talked about was the embedded, concurrent, and transformative assessment. And part of what I got the impression from this article that was really dealing with was the idea that when we take a look at what has been purported to be discovered, and we allow ourselves to be assessing it, thinking about it, doing some of our own tests, trying to see if we can corroborate it, that there's something about the process of assessing conclusions that helps us to sometimes take those conclusions and tweak them, fine-tune them, move them forward a little bit farther, or perhaps move some things out of it so that it can move forward without some of the things that might hold it back. And that there's something about this process of assessing that leads to transforming that which is already believed to be known, that actually improves upon it and builds it forward. And this is the kind. Sometimes Bible studies include this in a sense, but not in a manner that admits that it can actually be done to move theology forward. Just that it's something that can be done to move the individual forward in their accepting of the theology that has already been determined to be true. Sometimes you'll hear people say, "Well, I've been looking at this, and the Lord is really showing me how His sovereignty really," And many times they're just talking about some event that they had that is confirming for them something they had doubts about, but that was already declared to be true, and now they're finding themselves submitting to it. That's often something that happens within the Christian community, but that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about actually altering, modifying, and changing the way we understand a concept by the process of assessing it in a manner that leads us to fine-tune it and tweak it. And certainly every idea when it first comes about, particularly if it's revolutionary, can be just astounding. And there's a sense in which we have to kind of acclimate ourselves to that environment and that perspective before we can even begin to think more critically about it and discover, well, wait a minute, there's a couple of weaknesses here in the way we're talking about it. And there's so that ongoing assessment as just recognized as a part of how it's going to go and how it's going to work. And the one of the other items that she talked about was to rise above, that we recognize that an environment where we're going to be building our knowledge is an environment in which we're going to expect that it's going to take us to new heights. It's going to bring us to places we'd never been before, and that we should expect that should be part of it. Whereas a lot of theology, a lot of indoctrination, a lot of discipling involves trying to bring people who have not been a part of the fold up to speed with where the fold is, but we don't want them taking it any farther than that. So we're really just taking the newbie and trying to get them into the tradition in that sense. But that's not what the rise above here. The rise above here is really more a concept of let us all be going a place none of us have ever been before and take this to new heights where we in fact, when you see this in the area of science, it is amazing. Einstein, when he published his theory of special relativity and general relativity, he really challenged some things that moved the world of physics forward in just a powerful way. And yet, as a result of that, there are so many other physicists who today are now, as a result of what Einstein did for us, moving physics even farther forward than Einstein had taken us. We're rising above. We're looking at things that we couldn't even think about, even after Einstein broke through some of these barriers that had us stuck for a while. And so this is important. Now, one of the ways that I want to talk about this and discuss this in a way I hope I can make clear about the hypocrisy of theology in this regard is in this way. Scientists study the universe. They study the reality that we live in. And the truth is that since human beings have been around, the principles of the universe have been rather stable, and yet our knowledge of the universe is constantly growing. I would like to say the universe is a revelation of itself, and it's a very authoritative revelation of itself. And we've had the universe to look at and to study and to examine for thousands of years. But just because the universe is what it is and has been stably what it is, doesn't mean that we therefore know it or that we therefore understand it. Our knowledge of the universe is growing as each generation moves this forward and rises above in its own way. And this is because we are discovering things about the universe that once we discover them, there are not scientists, for example, who are claiming that when we discover something about physics that this is something that previously wasn't even really true, but now it is about physics. We're not suggesting that physics has changed. In an area that I'm very much involved in linguistics, when we have moved from a pre-structuralist view, when we went through what Ferdinand de Saussure brought us and Edward Sapir, and when we then move forward with that and we kind of move beyond the structuralism, we look at the things that Noam Chomsky has given to us, and talking about deep structure and innate grammar and a variety of, we're moving this thing constantly forward. We're not suggesting that language is actually getting more sophisticated. It isn't. We're suggesting that language has always had these elements, has always operated on these cognitive aspects ever since man has been, what we know him to be. And that we're just learning more about what the brain and the cognitive processes of language acquisition and language usage actually are as we discover it more and more, as we look at it, as we examine it, as we test these theories, as we seek to observe whether or not these things are so, or regularities that exist more often than not. And as a result, the field is moving further ahead, but all of this moving ahead is happening in a context where the scientists and the scholars studying it are not suggesting that that our knowledge is changing because these things are changing. No, we're just learning more about things that have been rather stable since we started studying them. And so it makes me wonder, okay, why is it we don't study the biblical text this way? Why is it we don't study the concept of God this way? God can be who he is. The biblical text can be what it is, but our understanding of it is something that we can grow in understanding of in just the same way we can understand more about the atom tomorrow than we did yesterday. We can learn more by applying what we learn even about linguistics to the biblical text. We can learn more about what it is we could understand about God, the more we understand about our own psychology, our own nature, particularly if we believe we're made in the image of God. By learning and growing in this pervasiveness of knowledge and everything, this should be altering and helping us to move forward in our theology, where we should be understanding things today in Christianity that people in Paul's day couldn't even begin to understand because we just hadn't moved forward yet. And just because these things may even be, as some people would allege, totally revealed, that doesn't mean that they are totally understood, or that human beings are when it comes to religion or theology, are not in any need of moving things forward. We are never capable of understanding things that are beyond our capacity to appreciate, based on where we are culturally, based on where we are personally. And so therefore, there's this need for knowledge to be moving forward. And theology has just resisted this, and it's a shame that it does. And whenever somebody tries to move something forward and accomplishes that, at least with a group of people, many times this results in a split. which it shouldn't. This is one of the reasons why I really do appreciate what we're trying to do here at the New Covenant group. We have atheists and theists together talking about things. We have people in our hangouts many times discussing things. We have guests on various different of our programs. We're really trying to talk through issues, and we're not trying to, no one's trying to take their opinion and lord it over others. We're trying to recognize that all of these ideas are there in the pot, and we need to deal with them and be honest about their existence, and we're free to then walk away from these things concluding what it is we're personally ready to conclude. And so there's a willingness to allow this diversity and this discussion that helps to move things forward. And in reading this article, I just thought it was very fascinating the way that I thought it contrasted with the way so many fields of study are deeply engaged in various ways in how they move things forward. But Christianity and its theology is stuck, and it doesn't want to move. And when it finds causes to move, searches and doubles back and tries to do everything it can to make sure it doesn't have to move. It resists further moving forward. This strikes me as the strategy of fools. People who use faith as an excuse to sit back and drag their butt across the ground while people are trying to move forward. And it doesn't work. I would like to suggest to you that I have found that I have sought to be a person who is moving forward with knowledge. And I'll be honest with you, although it's changed a lot of my ideas, it has not done anything to destroy my sense of being a person of faith, in faith in God, nor has it actually done anything to challenge my sense of faith in who Jesus is, as I understand him. It certainly made changes in it, alterations. It's made me less certain of some things, more certain of others, and it's still all a part of the process where I try to respect that which I've already experienced and totally open to that moving in totally other different directions, should that seem appropriate, and and I look forward to ways in which that can happen by following a that is involved in that entire balance of issues in moving things forward. Well, I didn't get any, I wasn't aware of receiving any comments back, and I hope I didn't talk over your heads tonight. I do so much enjoy the comments that I do get back. But anyhow, I wanted to share how, having read this article, it just really touched me in terms of how this person had really analyzed and thought through the process of how knowledge builds, both individually and in any field of study, and how I find myself jealous of the rest of the world that likes to take its fields of study and move it forward. And so many of us theists, we're not interested in moving forward. We're not interested in taking this farther. We're not interested in incorporating all the things that we've learned about ourselves and each other and the world and the need for love and who God might be and how this speaks to it all, and to bring it down in very relevant, real terms that deal with us where we live, how we live, and the questions and challenges we actually experience in a way that demonstrates we care about each other instead of we're trying to just maintain people loyal to a party line, which is nothing but useless religion. Anyhow, that's about all I have to talk about tonight, and I found it interesting, and it certainly pushed a button in me, and I enjoyed reading the article. Let me tell you again who this was. It was Marlene Scardamelia, and it was an article called "The Collective Cognitive Responsibility for the Advancement of Knowledge," and it was just excellent. It was from a publication, Liberal Education and Knowledge Society. Anyway, but it's just a fascinating article, and I really enjoyed it. I hope that my relating it to the issue of theology was something you found helpful and beneficial. Thank you for listening. I'm Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor, and we'll see you again on Sunday. Thank you. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, stick around. In just a moment, on the Florida NCG studio stage, Dr. Michael W. Jones will be hosting The Cult of Honesty. Don't go away.